She's not all there anymore. Those 5 words shattered my world while I stood frozen in the hallway, clutching my coffee cup with trembling fingers. The betrayal cut deeper than any knife ever could. Today, I'm going to tell you something I never thought I'd share. If you also believe that we still have value, even after 60, type 1 in the comments. And please, leave a like and subscribe. Let's show that we're strong together. My name is Evelyn Margaret Thompson, and at 80 years old, I've become invisible in my own family. The floral housecoat I wear every morning, the one my daughter Claire bought me 3 Christmases ago, has become my uniform of irrelevance. Its faded roses mirror how I feel, once vibrant, now wilted and forgotten. I was standing in the narrow hallway of Claire's suburban Chicago home, the same hallway where family photos line the walls, pictures that chronicle our lives but somehow make me feel more absent than present. The hardwood floors creaked beneath my slippered feet as I approached the living room, carrying my morning coffee in the porcelain cup Claire had designated as Mom's cup, though even that small ownership felt conditional. That's when I heard them. Claire's voice, low and conspiratorial, mixed with her husband David's deeper tone. They were discussing me as if I were a problem to be solved rather than a person to be loved. "She's not all there anymore," Claire whispered, and I felt my knees nearly buckle. The coffee cup trembled in my hands, the liquid sloshing dangerously close to the rim. It's time we handle things before she messes something up with the money. The woman who had once changed my diapers, who I had rocked to sleep through countless nights of fever and nightmares, who I had cheered for at every school play and graduation, she was talking about me like I was a burden to be managed. I pressed my back against the cool wall, my heart hammering so loudly I was certain they could hear it. The hallway seemed to stretch endlessly in both directions, trapping me between the kitchen where I'd been invisible and the living room where I was being erased. David's response cut even deeper. "Maybe it's time to look into that memory care facility, the one with the nice gardens." She seemed to like gardens. Gardens. As if my entire existence could be reduced to a pleasant distraction. Something to keep me occupied while they dismantled the life I'd built with my own hands. I had raised Claire alone after her father walked out when she was just 18 months old. 23 years old, working at Woolworths during the day and cleaning offices at night. I had sacrificed everything for her future. I sold my grandmother's jewelry to pay for her dance lessons. I wore the same winter coat for 7 years so Claire could have the latest fashions. I ate peanut butter sandwiches for dinner so she could have proper meals. The memories flooded back like a dam breaking. Teaching her to ride a bicycle in Lincoln Park, running alongside her until my lungs burned, refusing to let go until she was ready. Staying up until 2 a.m. sewing her prom dress by hand because the store-bought ones were beyond our budget. Working double shifts to afford her college tuition, telling her it was no problem while my feet bled in shoes held together with duct tape. But standing in that hallway, listening to her plan my disposal, those memories felt like evidence of my own foolishness rather than love. The coffee cup slipped from my fingers, hitting the hardwood floor with a sharp crack that echoed through the house like a gunshot. The brown liquid spread across the wood, seeping into the grooves between the planks. Permanent stains that couldn't be cleaned away, just like the words I'd just heard. "Mom?" Claire's voice called out, suddenly bright and artificial. "Are you okay?" I stared down at the broken porcelain scattered at my feet, each piece reflecting the overhead light like tears. The cup had been my mother's, one of the few things I'd managed to keep through all the years of moving and downsizing. Now it lay in fragments, and I realized it was fitting somehow. "I'm fine," I called back, my voice steadier than I felt. Just clumsy, but I wasn't fine. As I knelt on the floor, carefully picking up the pieces with hands that shook not from age but from heartbreak, I felt something crack inside me too. Not break, crack. Like ice beginning to shift before the spring thaw. That evening, I sat in the small bedroom that had become my world. Claire called it the guest room, though I'd been living there for 8 months. The walls were painted a generic beige, and the furniture was mismatched pieces from various rooms throughout the house. Nothing belonged to me except the contents of 2 suitcases and a cardboard box labeled Mom's Things in Claire's neat handwriting. I opened that box for the first time since moving in, breathing in the scent of lavender sachets and old paper. Inside were photographs spanning 60 years, My wedding day, Claire's first steps, Christmas mornings when joy came wrapped in newspaper because we couldn't afford proper gift wrap. There was one photo that made me pause. Claire at age 7, gap-toothed and grinning, holding a handmade Mother's Day card that read, "I love you bigger than the whole world, Mommy." Her small hands had carefully drawn hearts around the edges, and she'd signed it with a backwards C that I'd found adorable. Where was that little girl now? When had she stopped seeing me as the woman who hung the moon and started seeing me as the woman who couldn't remember where she put it? I pressed the photograph to my chest and closed my eyes, feeling the first tears I'd allowed myself to shed in months. They fell silently, the way tears do when you've learned that crying aloud only makes people uncomfortable. Outside my window, Chicago's skyline twinkled in the distance. Millions of lights representing millions of lives. I wondered how many other elderly parents were sitting in borrowed bedrooms, holding on to memories of children who had grown into strangers. But as I sat there in the gathering darkness, something began to stir inside me, a memory not of Claire as a child, but of myself at 23, young and terrified, but determined to build a life for us both. That woman had been fierce. She had been resourceful. She had been nobody's victim. Was I used? The question formed itself in my mind like a whisper, growing louder with each repetition. Was I used? Was everything I gave taken for granted, measured by its usefulness rather than its love? I tucked the photograph back into the box and closed the lid softly. Tomorrow, I decided, I would begin to remember who Evelyn Thompson really was. Tomorrow, I would stop being invisible. The city lights blurred through my tears, but for the first time in months, they looked less like distant dreams and more like possibilities waiting to be discovered. I was 80 years old, but I wasn't finished yet. Not by a long shot. The next morning, I woke before dawn, as I had every day for the past 60 years. Old habits die hard, even when there's no longer anyone to cook breakfast for or any job to rush to. The house was still wrapped in that heavy silence that comes before the world wakes up, and I found myself grateful for these stolen moments of solitude. I made my way to the kitchen, my bare feet silent on the cold tile floor. The coffee maker sat on the counter like a loyal friend, one of the few things that still responded to my touch without judgment. As the machine gurgled to life, I stood at the window watching the sun paint the Chicago skyline in shades of gold and amber. This kitchen had never felt like mine. Despite living here for 8 months, every surface was Claire's. Granite countertops I'd never have been able to afford. Stainless steel appliances that intimidated me with their digital displays and beeping sounds. Even the coffee was different from what I'd bought for myself for 40 years. "This is better for you, Mom," Claire had said when she'd thrown away my familiar brand. Less acidic. Everything was better for me, according to Claire, as if my 80 years of making choices had taught me nothing about what I preferred. I pulled out my phone, another source of daily frustration, and scrolled through old photos while I waited for the coffee to finish brewing. The screen was too bright, the buttons too small, but I'd learned to navigate it out of necessity. Claire had insisted I needed to stay connected, though connected to what, I often wondered. There was a photo from 1987, Claire in her high school graduation cap and gown, beaming with pride as she held her diploma. I remembered that day with crystalline clarity. I had worked 6 double shifts that month to afford the professional photographer, skipping meals to pay for the cap and gown rental. My feet had been so swollen from standing behind the department store counter that I'd had to cut slits in my shoes just to walk to the ceremony. But seeing Claire's face in that moment, pure joy, pure possibility, had made every sacrifice feel worthwhile. She had been accepted to Northwestern University with a partial scholarship, and I had been so proud I'd cried right there in the auditorium, not caring who saw me. The coffee finished brewing with a final sputter, and I poured myself a cup, using one of Claire's everyday mugs since my special cup lay in pieces in yesterday's trash. The hot liquid warmed my hands through the ceramic, and I allowed myself to remember more. The apartment we'd shared during Claire's college years had been a cramped 2-bedroom in Wicker Park, back when the neighborhood was more gritty than trendy. I'd given Claire the larger bedroom and made do with a space barely big enough for a twin bed and a dresser. The walls were thin, and I could hear her studying late into the night, her pencil scratching across paper as she worked through economics problems and literature essays. During her sophomore year, Claire had called me at work, sobbing so hard I could barely understand her words. "Mom, I can't do this," she'd cried. "The workload is too much and I'm failing calculus. Maybe I should just drop out and get a job." I had left work early that day, losing half a day's pay I couldn't afford to lose, and taken the bus to her dormitory. I found her crumpled on her narrow bed, surrounded by textbooks and crumpled tissues. She looked so small, so defeated, nothing like the confident young woman who'd walked across that graduation stage just 2 years before. "Look at me," I had said, sitting on the edge of her bed and taking her face in my hands. "You are Evelyn Thompson's daughter. We don't quit. We don't give up. We find another way." I had called in sick the next day and spent 12 hours helping her organize her study schedule, creating flashcards and talking her through the calculus problems that had seemed impossible. When her stomach rumbled, I'd bought groceries and cooked her favorite meals in the tiny dorm kitchen. When she fell asleep over her textbooks, I'd covered her with a blanket and continued studying myself, learning calculus at age 45 so I could help her understand it. She'd passed that class with a B+. When she called to tell me her grade, I'd been so proud I'd bragged to every customer who'd come through my checkout line for a week. Now, standing in her expensive kitchen, I wondered if she remembered any of it. Did she remember the time I'd driven through a blizzard to bring her soup when she had the flu? Did she remember how I'd saved for 3 years to buy her a used car for graduation? Did she remember the countless times I'd listened to her problems, offered advice, celebrated her victories as if they were my own? My phone buzzed with a text message. "Claire, Mom, David and I are going to visit his parents this weekend. Mrs. Henderson will check on you Saturday. Make sure you take your medications." Mrs. Henderson was the neighbor who'd been conscripted into the role of my unofficial monitor, a kind woman in her 60s who treated me with the sort of careful patience usually reserved for children or pets. She'd knock on the door Saturday afternoon, ask if I needed anything, and report back to Claire that I was doing fine. I typed back, "Have a nice time." Then I deleted it and typed, "Okay." Then I deleted that too and simply sent. The emoji felt like surrender, the digital equivalent of a nod and a smile. "Don't worry about me. I'm fine. I'll be here when you get back." But inside, I was screaming. I finished my coffee and wandered into the living room, where family photos covered every surface like shrines to happiness. There was Claire's wedding photo, a beautiful 8x10 in a silver frame. I remembered that day too, how I'd spent my entire savings account on her dress, how I'd worked with the caterer to stay within budget while still giving her the wedding she'd dreamed of. I had walked her down the aisle myself, my arm linked through hers as we moved toward David waiting at the altar. She had looked radiant in the dress we'd chosen together after visiting 12 different shops. When the photographer had captured that moment, the two of us walking together, I had felt like we were a team, like all the years of struggle had led to this perfect day. Now David barely looked at me during dinner, responding to my attempts at conversation with polite nods before turning back to his phone. And Claire had become someone I barely recognized, someone who spoke to me in the tone you'd use with a difficult customer or a misbehaving child. I picked up another photo, Claire at age 30, holding my first grandchild, baby Emma. I had been in the delivery room, holding Claire's hand through 18 hours of labor, whispering encouragement when she thought she couldn't push anymore. When Emma finally arrived, tiny and perfect and screaming with life, Claire had looked at me with tears streaming down her face and said, "Thank you for showing me how to be strong, Mom." Emma was 15 now, a typical teenager who barely acknowledged my existence. When I tried to tell her stories about her mother's childhood, she'd roll her eyes and say, "Grandma, that's like ancient history." When I offered to help with her homework, she'd laugh and say, "No offense, but I don't think you'd understand the math we're doing now. No offense." As if dismissing my entire lifetime of experience could be softened by those 2 words. The weight of all those memories, all that love, all those sacrifices, all those moments when I had put Claire's needs before my own, pressed down on me like a physical force. I sank into the sofa, the same sofa where I'd been relegated to the corner spot. the place where I was expected to sit quietly while the real family discussed their real lives. I closed my eyes and let myself remember the hardest sacrifice of all. Claire had been accepted to a summer study program in Europe during her junior year of college. The cost was astronomical, more than I made in 6 months. But she had talked about it with such longing, such hope, that I couldn't bear to disappoint her. I had taken a second mortgage on my little house, the house I'd bought with my divorce settlement and fixed up with my own hands. The house that represented everything I'd accomplished as a single mother. My proof that I could provide for my daughter without anyone's help. Claire had spent that summer in London and Paris, sending postcards and letters filled with descriptions of museums and cafes, adventures and discoveries. She had come home transformed, confident in a way that only travel can create, full of stories and plans for her future. I had been so proud of her, so grateful that I'd been able to give her that experience. It had taken me 8 years to pay off that second mortgage, 8 years of working extra shifts and skipping meals and wearing clothes from thrift stores. But every time I'd made a payment, I'd thought about Claire's face when she'd described the Louvre or the Thames, and it had felt worth it. Now I wondered, did she ever think about the cost of that summer? Did she ever wonder how a department store clerk had managed to send her daughter to Europe? Did she ever connect her adventures to my sacrifices? Or had she simply accepted it all as her due? The way children accept their parents' love, thoughtlessly, carelessly, as if it were as natural and endless as air? The house stirred to life around me as Claire and David began their morning routines. I heard the shower running, the coffee maker being started again, the sound of the local news drifting down from their bedroom television. Soon they would come downstairs, and I would become the invisible woman again, the one who smiled and nodded and tried not to take up too much space in their perfectly organized lives. But something had changed since yesterday. The crack in my heart had widened during the night, and through it, I could see glimpses of the woman I used to be. The woman who had faced down landlords and bill collectors, who had worked 2 jobs and still found energy to help with homework, who had turned pennies into miracles and made magic out of nothing. That woman wouldn't have accepted being treated like a burden. That woman would have demanded respect, not begged for it. As I sat there in the growing morning light, I realized that the question I'd asked myself last night, was I used, was becoming an answer. Yes, I had been used. My love had been taken for granted, my sacrifices forgotten, my worth measured only by my usefulness. But I was still here, still breathing, still remembering, and maybe, just maybe, it wasn't too late to remind them all who Evelyn Thompson really was. 3 weeks passed like a slow torture. Every day brought new small humiliations, tiny cuts that individually seemed insignificant, but together formed a pattern of systematic dismissal that was eating away at my soul. It started with the pills. Claire had taken over my medication management, setting up one of those plastic weekly pill organizers with slots for morning, noon, and night. "It's for your own good, Mom," she'd said, confiscating the bottles from my purse as if I were a child who couldn't be trusted with candy. "We can't have you forgetting doses or taking too many." I had been managing my own medications for 15 years without incident. High blood pressure pills, a daily vitamin, and a low-dose aspirin. Nothing complicated. Nothing that required a pharmacology degree to understand. But Claire treated my mild forgetfulness about dinner plans as evidence that I was incapable of handling anything more complex than breathing. She would watch me take my morning pills, standing in the doorway with her arms crossed, checking off items on her mental list. "Did you take the blood pressure one? The small white one?" As if I hadn't been taking the same pills for years. As if my mind had suddenly become so addled that I couldn't distinguish between 3 simple medications. The worst part was the way she'd smile afterward, that bright, patronizing smile that said, "Good girl, Mom. You did what you were supposed to do." Then came the driving incident. I had asked to borrow Claire's car to visit my old neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, who lived in my former neighborhood about 20 minutes away. Mrs. Patterson had called to tell me about the death of another neighbor, someone I'd known for 30 years, and I wanted to attend the funeral. "Oh, Mom, I don't think that's such a good idea," Claire had said, not even looking up from her laptop. Your reflexes aren't what they used to be, and you get confused about directions sometimes. I drove myself to that neighborhood for 40 years, I'd replied, trying to keep my voice steady. I think I can manage 20 minutes on roads I know better than my own name. But what if something happens? What if you get lost? What if you have one of your episodes? Episodes. She made my occasional moments of distraction sound like seizures, like dangerous medical events rather than the normal scattered thoughts that came with age and stress. I had ended up taking 3 buses and walking 4 blocks to get to that funeral, arriving late and exhausted, my feet aching in shoes that weren't designed for that much walking. Mrs. Patterson had been shocked to see me arrive alone and breathless. "Where's Claire?" she'd asked. "I thought she'd drive you." I'd lied, of course. "She had a work emergency," I'd said, though the truth was sitting like a stone in my chest. The truth was that my own daughter no longer trusted me to drive to a funeral, no longer believed I was competent enough to navigate the streets of the city I'd lived in for 50 years. The social isolation was perhaps the cruelest cut of all. My phone had been my lifeline to the outside world, my connection to friends and former coworkers who still remembered me as a person rather than a problem. But Claire had decided that I was receiving too many spam calls and had changed my number without consulting me. "I've given the new number to everyone who matters," she'd assured me, handing me a piece of paper with my new contact information written in her neat handwriting. But apparently, everyone who matters was a very short list that didn't include most of my friends. Mrs. Patterson couldn't reach me anymore. Neither could my former coworker Janet, who'd been calling every Sunday for 5 years to check on me and share neighborhood gossip. My book club, which had been meeting monthly for a decade, lost touch with me entirely. One by one, the threads that connected me to my former life were being cut, leaving me more isolated with each passing day. When I asked Claire about getting my old number back, she'd sighed with the exaggerated patience of someone dealing with an unreasonable child. "Mom, the new number is easier to remember. And this way, I can screen your calls and make sure you're not being bothered by telemarketers or scammers trying to take advantage of elderly people. Elderly people, not you, but elderly people, as if I were a category rather than her mother. A demographic rather than an individual with preferences and desires and the right to decide who I wanted to talk to." The breaking point came on a Tuesday afternoon in October. I had been having one of my rare good days, the kind where my mind felt sharp and my energy was higher than usual. I'd decided to bake cookies, something I'd done thousands of times throughout Claire's childhood, something that had once filled our home with warmth and the kind of love that could be measured in tablespoons of vanilla and handfuls of chocolate chips. I'd found a basic recipe online and made a shopping list. Nothing complicated. Flour, sugar, eggs, butter, chocolate chips. Items that any grocery store would have. Ingredients that even a forgetful old woman should be able to manage. But when I'd asked Claire if I could use her car to go to the store, she'd looked at me with such genuine alarm that I'd felt my cheeks burn with shame. "Mom, you want to bake? By yourself?" The disbelief in her voice was unmistakable. "What if you forget to turn off the oven? What if you burn yourself? What if you leave something on the stove?" "I've been baking for 60 years, I'd said quietly. "I think I can manage a batch of chocolate chip cookies." "But Mom, you're not as sharp as you used to be. Last week you couldn't remember what day it was. And you left the faucet running in the bathroom for an hour." She was right about the faucet. I had left it running, distracted by a phone call from a telemarketer trying to sell me insurance I didn't need. But one forgotten faucet had somehow become evidence that I was a danger to myself and others. Proof that I couldn't be trusted with basic tasks. "I'll buy the ingredients for you," Claire had said, her voice taking on that artificially bright tone she used when she thought she was being helpful. "And we can bake together this weekend. That way I can make sure everything goes smoothly. Together, as if baking cookies had become a supervised activity, something that required oversight and assistance. As if the woman who had baked thousands of cookies, cakes, and pies throughout her lifetime had suddenly become incompetent to handle a simple recipe. I'd nodded and smiled, because that's what I always did. I'd accepted her offer and pretended to be grateful for her help. But inside, I was screaming. Inside, I was remembering all the times I'd baked cookies for her school events, her birthday parties, her friends' sleepovers. All the times she'd stood on a chair beside me in the kitchen, wearing my old apron tied around her tiny waist, helping me measure ingredients and lick the spoon. Now she was afraid to let me use her kitchen unsupervised, afraid that the woman who had taught her to bake would somehow burn down the house or poison the family with improperly mixed dough. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, feeling the weight of all these small humiliations pressing down on me like a physical force. Each incident alone might have been brushed off, explained away as concern or caution, but together, they formed a clear pattern. I was being systematically stripped of my autonomy, my dignity, my basic human right to make decisions about my own life. I was becoming a prisoner in my daughter's home, a carefully managed problem rather than a beloved family member. Every day brought new restrictions, new ways in which my competence was questioned and my independence was eroded. The woman who had raised Claire alone, who had worked multiple jobs to support us both, who had navigated the challenges of single motherhood in an era when divorced women were still viewed with suspicion. That woman was being treated like she was incapable of managing the simplest tasks of daily life. But the worst part wasn't the restrictions themselves. The worst part was how easily I had accepted them, how quickly I had begun to doubt my own capabilities. When someone you love treats you like you're incompetent often enough, you start to believe it. When someone you trust questions your judgment repeatedly, you begin to question it yourself. I had started second-guessing every decision, every thought, every impulse. Was I really forgetting more than usual, or was Claire hypervigilant about every minor lapse? Was I actually becoming confused, or was I just overwhelmed by the constant scrutiny? Was I losing my mind, or was I losing my confidence because someone was chipping away at it day after day? The next morning, I woke up with a decision crystallizing in my mind. I needed to know the truth about my own condition. I needed to separate Claire's perceptions from medical reality. I needed to understand whether her restrictions were based on genuine concern or something else entirely. I waited until Claire left for work. Then I called my longtime physician, Dr. Roberts, and scheduled an appointment. I used the landline in the kitchen, speaking quietly even though I was alone in the house, feeling like a teenager sneaking behind her parents' back. "I'd like a complete evaluation," I told the receptionist. "Memory, cognitive function, everything. I need to know where I stand." The appointment was set for the following week. I would take a taxi if I had to. I would find a way to get there independently, without Claire's supervision or input. I needed to hear from a medical professional whether my daughter's concerns were justified, or whether something else was driving her need to control every aspect of my life. As I hung up the phone, I caught my reflection in the kitchen window. The woman looking back at me had tired eyes and shoulders that had learned to curve inward, as if she were trying to take up less space in the world. But there was something else there too, a spark of determination that I hadn't seen in months. I was going to find out the truth about my condition, and depending on what I learned, I might need to make some very difficult decisions about my future. The kitchen was quiet around me, but for the first time in weeks, the silence didn't feel oppressive. It felt like the calm before something important was about to happen. I just had to be brave enough to face whatever truth was waiting for me. Dr. Roberts's office hadn't changed in the 15 years I'd been his patient. The same beige walls, the same motivational posters about heart health and exercise, the same comfortable chairs that had witnessed thousands of conversations between doctor and patient. But sitting there that Thursday morning, I felt like I was about to have the most important conversation of my life. "Evelyn," Dr. Roberts said, settling into his chair with the unhurried manner that had always made me feel like I was his only patient. "Tell me what's been troubling you." I had rehearsed this conversation in my head for days, but now that the moment had arrived, the words tumbled out in a rush. I told him about Claire's concerns, about the forgotten faucet, and the occasional confusion about dates, about the way I was being treated like I was losing my mind. "I need to know the truth," I said, my voice shaking slightly. "Is something really wrong with me? Am I becoming incompetent?" What followed was the most thorough examination I'd ever received. Memory tests, cognitive assessments, coordination checks, blood work to rule out vitamin deficiencies or other medical causes of confusion. Dr. Roberts was methodical and patient, explaining each test as we went along. 3 hours later, I sat across from him again as he reviewed the results. "Evelyn," he said, looking at me over his reading glasses, "there's nothing wrong with you. Your cognitive function is completely normal for someone your age. Better than normal, actually. Your memory is sharp, your reasoning is sound, and your overall mental health is excellent." The relief that flooded through me was so intense I had to grip the arms of my chair to keep from sobbing. But the forgetfulness, the confusion, what you're describing sounds like normal age-related changes mixed with what I suspect is significant stress, Dr. Roberts said gently. Anyone living under constant scrutiny and having their competence questioned daily would show signs of anxiety and self-doubt. It's a psychological response, not a cognitive decline. He leaned forward, his expression serious. "Evelyn, I'm going to ask you a difficult question. Do you feel safe in your current living situation? Are you being treated with respect?" The question hung in the air between us like a bridge I wasn't sure I was ready to cross. But Dr. Roberts' kind eyes and professional concern gave me the courage to tell the truth. "No," I whispered. "I don't feel respected. I feel like a burden they're managing rather than a person they love." Dr. Roberts nodded slowly. "What you're describing sounds like what we call elder emotional abuse. It's more common than people realize, and it often happens gradually with the best of intentions. But the impact on the elderly person can be devastating. Elder abuse." The words hit me like cold water. I had never thought of Claire's behavior in those terms, but hearing Dr. Roberts name it made everything click into place. "I'm going to give you some resources," he continued, writing on his prescription pad. "Support groups, counseling services, and legal information about your rights as an elderly person. You have options, Evelyn. You don't have to accept treatment that makes you feel diminished." I left his office with a clean bill of mental health and a folder full of information that felt like weapons in a war I hadn't known I was fighting. But the most important thing I carried with me was the validation that my feelings were justified, that I wasn't losing my mind or being overly sensitive. The taxi ride home gave me time to think. I had proof now that Claire's restrictions weren't medically necessary. So what were they really about? Control? Guilt over putting me in a care facility? Or something else entirely? I was about to find out. Claire was waiting in the living room when I walked through the door, her face a mask of barely controlled fury. "Where were you?" she demanded, standing up from the sofa with sharp, aggressive movements. "Mrs. Henderson came to check on you and you were gone. No note, no phone call, nothing. We were worried sick." The irony wasn't lost on me. She was worried about me because I'd left the house to prove I was competent to leave the house. "I had a doctor's appointment," I said calmly, setting my purse down and straightening my shoulders. "A doctor's appointment? With who? Dr. Roberts isn't on your schedule for another month, and I would have known about any other appointments." "I made the appointment myself," I said, meeting her eyes steadily. "I wanted a complete evaluation of my mental state." Claire's face went pale, then red. "You did what? Mom? You can't just make medical appointments without telling me. What if something had happened? What if you'd gotten confused and given the doctor wrong information about your medications?" David appeared in the doorway, drawn by the tension in Claire's voice. Behind him, I could see Emma hovering in the hallway, her teenage curiosity overcoming her usual indifference to family drama. "The doctor says I'm fine," I said, pulling the evaluation results from my purse. "Completely normal cognitive function for my age. Better than normal, actually." Claire snatched the papers from my hands, scanning them with the intensity of someone looking for evidence to support a predetermined conclusion. David read over her shoulder, and I watched their expressions change from anger to confusion to something that looked almost like disappointment. "This can't be right," Claire said finally. "You forget things all the time. You left the faucet running. You get confused about dates." "I forgot one faucet and occasionally mix up Tuesday and Wednesday," I replied, my voice growing stronger. "That doesn't make me incompetent. It makes me human." "But Mom, you're not thinking clearly. You make poor decisions. You wanted to drive alone. You wanted to bake unsupervised." "I wanted to live my life," I interrupted, surprising myself with the firmness in my voice. "I wanted to visit friends, bake cookies, and make my own medical appointments. Things I've been doing successfully for 80 years. Emma stepped closer, her young face confused. Wait, Grandma, you're not sick? No, sweetheart, I said, looking directly at her. I'm not sick. I'm just old, and apparently that's enough for some people to treat me like I'm broken. Claire's face flushed again. Mom, that's not fair. We're trying to take care of you. We're trying to keep you safe. Safe from what? I asked. From living? From making choices? From having opinions? From making mistakes that could hurt you, David said, speaking for the first time. His voice was calm, reasonable, the tone he used in business meetings. Elderly people are vulnerable to scams, accidents, poor judgment calls. We've seen it happen to other people our age. Their parents start making bad decisions, and the family has to step in. What bad decisions have I made? I asked. Specifically, not theoretical elderly people, not other families. What bad decisions have I, Evelyn Thompson, made that justified taking away my right to drive, to manage my own medications, to choose who I talk to on the phone? The silence that followed was deafening. Claire and David exchanged glances, and I could see them searching for examples that would justify their treatment of me. You sometimes seem confused, Claire said weakly. When? Well, last week you asked what day it was. Because I was reading a book and lost track of time. That's not confusion, that's concentration. And you've been more forgetful lately. I've been stressed lately. There's a difference. Emma was watching this exchange with wide eyes, and I could see her processing everything she was hearing. For the first time, she was seeing her grandmother not as a doddering old woman, but as a person defending herself against unfair treatment. Grandma, Emma said quietly, why didn't you tell us you felt this way? Would anyone have listened? I asked gently. When your grandmother tries to explain how she feels, does anyone take her seriously, or do they assume she's just confused? Emma looked at her parents, then back at me, and I could see understanding dawning in her young face. You've been treating Grandma like she's stupid, she said to Claire and David, her voice carrying the moral clarity that teenagers sometimes possess. Even I could see that, and I didn't think it was fair. Claire turned on her daughter. Emma, you don't understand the complexity of the situation. What's complex about it? Emma shot back. Grandma is smart and capable, and you've been treating her like she's not. That's not complex. That's just mean. The word hung in the air. Mean. Not protective, not caring, not well-intentioned. Mean. I think, I said quietly, that this conversation has shown us all where we stand. I'm going to pack my things. I'll be out of your house by tomorrow. Claire's face went white. Mom, you can't just leave. Where will you go? You don't have anywhere to go. I'll figure it out, I said, heading toward the stairs. I'm apparently more capable than any of us realized. As I climbed the stairs to my room, I heard Emma's voice behind me. Good for you, Grandma. It was the first time in months that anyone in this house had said they were proud of me. The fact that it came from a 15-year-old who had just witnessed her parents' treatment of me laid bare made it both heartbreaking and hopeful. I had a phone call to make. Dr. Roberts had given me the number for a senior living community that focused on independent living rather than medical care. A place where I could have my own apartment, my own life, my own choices. For the first time in months, I was going to make a decision about my future, and no one was going to manage, supervise, or approve it for me. I was done being managed. I was ready to start living again. The silence in my borrowed bedroom felt different that night. Not oppressive, but expectant. Like the quiet before dawn when the world holds its breath in anticipation of something new. I sat on the edge of the bed, holding the business card Dr. Roberts had given me. Riverside Gardens Senior Community. Independent living with dignity. Independent living with dignity. The words felt like a prayer I'd forgotten how to say. I had called them that afternoon while Claire was at work, and David was still processing what had happened during our confrontation. The woman who answered had a warm voice and spoke to me like I was a person making a choice rather than a problem being solved. We have a one-bedroom apartment available immediately, she'd told me. It has a full kitchen, private bathroom, and a small balcony overlooking the Chicago River. The community is designed for seniors who want to maintain their independence while having access to support services if they choose to use them. If they choose. 2 words that had been missing from my vocabulary for months. "Would you like to schedule a tour?" she'd asked. "Yes," I'd said, surprising myself with how quickly the word came out. "Tomorrow morning, if possible." Now, sitting in the gathering darkness, I was making lists in my head. What to pack, what to leave behind, how to navigate the logistics of moving out without creating more family drama than necessary. But underneath the practical considerations was something much deeper, the growing realization that I was about to reclaim my life. A soft knock on my door interrupted my thoughts. "Grandma?" Emma's voice, uncertain but caring. "Come in, sweetheart." Emma slipped into the room, closing the door quietly behind her. She was wearing her pajamas, soft flannel pants and an oversized t-shirt that made her look younger than her 15 years. Her hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, and her face bore the serious expression of someone wrestling with complex emotions. "Are you really leaving?" she asked, settling onto the chair by my dresser. "I think so, yes." "Because of what Mom and Dad have been doing to you?" I studied my granddaughter's face, seeing traces of Claire at that age, but also something uniquely her own, a directness, a willingness to confront uncomfortable truths that her mother had lost somewhere along the way. "Emma, your parents love me, I know that. But they've been treating me like I can't take care of myself, and I've been letting them do it because I thought maybe they were right. Today I found out they weren't right, and I realized I don't want to spend whatever years I have left being managed like a problem instead of living like a person." Emma nodded slowly. "I noticed it too, the way they talk to you sometimes, like you're not smart anymore. It made me uncomfortable, but I didn't know how to say anything. You said something today. You called it what it was. Mean. That took courage. I felt bad for not saying anything sooner." Emma's voice was small, tinged with the guilt that sensitive children carry when they witness injustice, but don't know how to stop it. "You're 15, honey. It's not your job to manage the adults in this family, but I'm proud of you for speaking up when it mattered." We sat in comfortable silence for a moment. 3 generations of Thompson women represented in this small room. Emma, myself, and the ghost of the young mother I'd been when I was raising Claire alone. "Where will you go?" Emma asked. I told her about Riverside Gardens, about the apartment with the balcony overlooking the river, about the community of people who wanted to live independently but also have company when they chose it. "It sounds nice," Emma said wistfully. "Like a place where you can be yourself." "That's exactly what it sounds like to me, too." Emma was quiet for a long moment, then looked at me with the kind of intensity that only teenagers can muster. "Grandma, will you still be my grandmother if you don't live here anymore?" The question broke my heart and mended it at the same time. "Oh, sweetheart, I will always be your grandmother. Moving out of this house doesn't change that. If anything, it might make our relationship better. Because when we spend time together, it will be because we want to, not because we have to. Can I visit you? At your new place? I would love that. And Emma, when you visit, I'll teach you how to bake those chocolate chip cookies I've been wanting to make. We'll do it together, just us, and we'll make a mess and not worry about whether anyone thinks we're being safe enough." Emma smiled for the first time since entering my room. "I'd like that." After she left, I continued packing. Not everything. I'd been accumulating possessions for 80 years, and most of them would have to stay behind or be donated. But the important things. Photographs that told the story of my life, the jewelry box my mother had given me, a few books that had been faithful companions through difficult times. As I folded clothes into my old suitcase, I found myself thinking about the woman I'd been before Claire was born. 22 years old, newly divorced, scared but determined. That woman had been fierce in her own quiet way. She'd worked multiple jobs, figured out how to fix a leaky faucet and balance a checkbook, learned to navigate single motherhood without a roadmap. When had I stopped being that woman? When had I started doubting my own competence, deferring to others' judgment about my life? The answer was complicated, involving grief over lost independence, the gradual erosion of confidence that comes with physical aging, and the well-meaning but suffocating care of adult children who confused love with control. But none of those factors changed the fundamental truth. I was still that fierce woman underneath all the layers of doubt and accommodation. The next morning, I woke before dawn, and made coffee in Claire's kitchen for what I hoped would be the last time. The house was silent around me, and I savored these stolen moments of solitude before the day's complications began. At 8 o'clock sharp, the taxi I'd called arrived to take me to Riverside Gardens. I left a note for Claire. Gone to look at apartments. Back this afternoon. Don't worry. Simple, direct, and offering no opportunity for discussion or interference. The senior community was nothing like the sterile nursing home I'd feared. The buildings were low-rise and modern, surrounded by gardens that were still beautiful despite the late October weather. The lobby felt more like a hotel than an institution, with comfortable seating areas and large windows that let in plenty of natural light. Martha Chen, the community director, met me at the front desk. She was a woman in her 60s with silver hair and laugh lines that suggested someone who found joy in her work. "You must be Evelyn," she said, extending her hand with genuine warmth. "I'm so glad you could come today." The apartment was on the 3rd floor, with windows facing east toward the Chicago River. It was small, but complete. A real kitchen where I could cook whatever I wanted whenever I wanted. A living room where I could arrange furniture according to my own preferences. A bedroom that would be mine alone. But it was the balcony that sold me. Standing there, looking out over the water with the city skyline in the distance, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Possibility. This could be my view, my morning coffee spot, my place to watch the seasons change without anyone monitoring whether I was taking too long or forgetting to come inside. "The lease is month to month initially," Martha explained as we walked back through the apartment. "No long-term commitment until you're sure this is right for you. And there's no buy-in fee, just first month's rent and a refundable security deposit." "When could I move in?" I asked. "Tomorrow, if you'd like. We have a furniture rental service that can have basic pieces delivered this afternoon if you need them." Tomorrow. The word felt like a lifeline thrown to someone who'd been drowning. "I'll take it," I said, the decision feeling as natural as breathing. Martha smiled. "I was hoping you'd say that. Let me get the paperwork started." As I signed the lease agreement, using my own name and making my own financial decisions for the first time in months, I felt a door opening inside me. This wasn't just about changing my address. It was about reclaiming my identity as a person capable of making choices about her own life. The taxi ride back to Claire's house gave me time to prepare for what I knew would be a difficult conversation. But I felt armed now with more than just medical evaluations and righteous indignation. I had a plan, a place to go, and most importantly, proof that I was capable of handling my own affairs. Claire was waiting in the living room when I walked through the door, her face a mixture of worry and barely contained anger. "Where have you been?" she demanded. "You can't just disappear like that without telling anyone where you're going." "I told you in my note. I was looking at apartments." "Apartments?" Claire's voice rose. "Mom, you can't live alone. We've been through this. You need supervision, I need respect," I interrupted, settling into the chair across from her with the deliberate calm of someone who'd made up her mind. "And I found an apartment where I can have it." I told her about Riverside Gardens, about the balcony and the kitchen and the month-to-month lease. I watched her face cycle through disbelief, anger, and something that might have been panic. "This is ridiculous," she said finally. "You're being impulsive and emotional. You're not thinking clearly." "I'm thinking more clearly than I have in months," I replied. "And I'm moving out tomorrow." "Tomorrow?" David had appeared in the doorway, drawn by the sound of our raised voices. "Evelyn, you can't just move out overnight. There are things to consider, arrangements to make." "I've made the arrangements. I've signed the lease. I've rented furniture. The only thing left to do is pack my belongings and go." Claire stood up abruptly, pacing to the window and back. "This is insane. You're 80 years old. You can't just run away from home like a teenager." "I'm not running away," I said quietly. "I'm going home. To my home, where I can take my own medications, bake my own cookies, and decide for myself whether I'm competent to drive to the grocery store." The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken fears and long-buried resentments. But I sat in it calmly, feeling more centered than I had since moving into this house 8 months ago. For the first time in almost a year, I was going to sleep in a place where I belonged. where I was wanted not because someone felt obligated to care for me, but because I had chosen to be there. Tomorrow, I would wake up free. The moving truck arrived at 9 o'clock sharp the next morning, a modest vehicle that seemed almost too small to contain the significance of what was happening. I had slept better than I had in months, waking with a clarity and purpose that felt like sunlight after a long winter. Claire had barely spoken to me at breakfast, her jaw set in the stubborn line I remembered from her teenage years when she'd decided the entire world was conspiring against her. David sat behind his newspaper, occasionally making disapproving sounds that seemed directed at the headlines, but felt pointed at me. Only Emma had seemed genuinely excited about my move. She'd knocked on my door early, asking if she could help carry boxes, and had spent an hour helping me organize my belongings with the efficiency of someone who understood the importance of what we were doing. "Grandma," she'd said as we wrapped my mother's china in newspaper, "I think you're being really brave." "It doesn't feel brave, sweetheart. It feels necessary." Sometimes those are the same thing. The wisdom of 15-year-olds could be startling in its simplicity and truth. The movers were professionals, efficient and courteous, treating my possessions with the care of people who understood that moving day was always emotional, regardless of age. They loaded my furniture, what little I was taking, and my boxes of books, photographs, and personal items that represented 80 years of life distilled into manageable portions. Claire stood in the doorway watching, her arms crossed, her face a mask of barely controlled emotion. I couldn't tell if she was angry, hurt, scared, or some combination of all three. Perhaps she didn't know either. "This is a mistake, Mom," she said as the movers carried out the last of my belongings. "You're going to regret this." "Maybe," I replied, surprised by how calm I felt. "But it will be my mistake to make and my regret to live with. I haven't had that luxury in a long time." That's when she broke. "Luxury?" Claire's voice cracked. And suddenly she wasn't a controlling middle-aged woman anymore. She was my frightened daughter, the little girl who used to crawl into my bed during thunderstorms. "Mom, I was trying to take care of you. I was trying to keep you safe. I was trying to be a good daughter." "Oh, honey." I set down my purse and moved toward her, seeing past her anger to the fear underneath. "You are a good daughter. You've always been a good daughter. But taking care of someone doesn't mean taking over their life. But you were forgetting things, making mistakes." I was forgetting small things and making minor mistakes, the same way everyone does when they're stressed and feeling watched all the time. "You turned normal human fallibility into evidence of incompetence." David emerged from behind his newspaper, his face serious. "Evelyn." Claire was following the advice we got from the senior care counselor. When elderly parents start showing signs of cognitive decline, the family needs to step in before something serious happens. "What senior care counselor?" I asked, feeling a chill run down my spine. Claire and David exchanged glances, and I saw something pass between them, a recognition that they'd revealed more than they'd intended. "After you moved in," Claire said quietly, "I was worried about some of the things you were doing, so I called a service that helps families navigate these kinds of situations." "What kinds of situations?" "When parents start losing their independence, when they need more supervision but won't admit it." The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. "You diagnosed me before you observed me. You called someone who told you what to look for, and then you found exactly what you expected to find." "Mom, that's exactly what happened." My voice was steady, but inside I was shaking with a mixture of betrayal and revelation. "You decided I was incompetent and then interpreted everything I did through that lens. A forgotten faucet became evidence of cognitive decline. Misremembering what day it was became proof I needed supervision." Emma had been standing quietly in the corner, but now she stepped forward. "Is that why you guys started treating Grandma differently? Because some stranger on the phone told you to?" The accusation in her young voice was damning, and I watched Claire's face crumble as she realized how her actions looked through her daughter's eyes. "We were trying to do the right thing," David said, but his voice lacked conviction. "For who?" I asked. "For me? Or for your peace of mind?" The question hung in the air, unanswered and unanswerable. "I need to ask you something," I said, looking directly at Claire. "And I need you to be honest with me. Was any of this about the money?" Another exchanged glance between Claire and David, longer this time, more loaded with meaning. "What money?" Claire asked, but her voice had lost its certainty. The money you think I have. The money you were worried I might mess up with. The money you mentioned when you thought I couldn't hear you. Claire's face went pale. Mom, I never said… You said I wasn't all there anymore, and that you needed to handle things before I messed something up with the money. I heard you, Claire. I was standing right in the hallway. The silence that followed was deafening. Emma looked back and forth between her parents and me, her young face processing the implications of what she was hearing. There is money, isn't there? David said finally. From the sale of your house? From your investments? Yes, I said simply. There is money. How much? Claire asked, and then immediately looked horrified that she'd voiced the question. I reached into my purse and pulled out a bank statement I'd brought specifically for this moment. I unfolded it carefully and handed it to Claire, watching her eyes widen as she read the balance. $2 million, she whispered. $2,400,000 to be exact. From the sale of my house, my investments, my savings, and your father's life insurance policy that I never touched. Claire sank into the nearest chair, the paper trembling in her hands. David leaned over her shoulder, his own face showing the same shock. Mom? Claire said, her voice barely audible. Why didn't you tell us? Because I knew this would happen, I replied sadly. I knew that the moment you found out about the money, everything would change. Every kindness would be measured against its value. Every decision I made would be scrutinized for its impact on your inheritance. That's not true, Claire protested, but her voice lacked conviction. Isn't it? Look at your face right now, Claire. Look at how you're looking at me. I'm not your mother anymore. I'm a bank account with legs. Emma made a small sound of distress, and I realized I was being harsher than I'd intended in front of her. The truth is, I continued more gently, I've been protecting that money for years, waiting for the right time to share it. I thought maybe when you retired, or when Emma went to college, or when one of you faced a real crisis. But now I realize I was also protecting it from becoming the reason you loved me. We don't love you for your money, David said, but even he seemed to hear how hollow the words sounded. David, you've been researching memory care facilities. I found the brochures in the kitchen drawer. Expensive ones. Did you think I wouldn't notice? His face flushed red. We were just being prepared. For what? For the day when you could commit me and take control of my finances legally? Mom, stop, Claire said, tears streaming down her face now. Please stop. Yes, okay. We knew you probably had some money saved. And yes, we thought about what would happen if you really did develop dementia. But we weren't trying to steal from you. We were trying to plan for your care, without consulting me, without involving me in decisions about my own life and my own money. I moved to the window, looking out at the street where my new life was waiting. I'm leaving now, I said, and I'm taking my money with me. All of it. All of it? Claire's voice was small. Every penny. It's going into accounts that only I control, with beneficiaries that I choose, to be distributed according to my wishes when I die. If I die. I turned back to face them, seeing my family clearly for perhaps the first time in years. Claire, beautiful and successful, but frightened of losing control. David, practical and well-meaning, but unable to see past his own assumptions. And Emma, young and idealistic, but beginning to understand that adults were capable of disappointing complexity. I don't want to punish any of you, I said, but I also don't want to reward behavior that made me feel like I was disappearing. If you want a relationship with me going forward, it will be because you value me as a person, not as a source of financial security. I picked up my purse and walked toward the door, pausing only to hug Emma goodbye. Will you still visit me? I whispered in her ear. Try and stop me, she whispered back. At the front door, I turned for one last look at the house that had been my prison for 8 months. Claire was still sitting in the chair, holding the bank statement like it was a piece of evidence she couldn't quite process. David stood behind her, his hand on her shoulder, both of them looking lost. I love you both, I said. I always have, and I always will. But I won't buy your love with my money or my compliance anymore. When you're ready to have a relationship with me as an equal, you know where to find me. I walked out the door and climbed into the taxi that was waiting to take me to my new life. As we pulled away from the curb, I didn't look back. Looking back was for people who weren't sure where they were going. I knew exactly where I was going. I was going home to myself. The first morning in my new apartment, I woke up at sunrise not because I had to, but because I wanted to. The light streaming through my bedroom window was different. Softer, more golden, filtered through glass that belonged to me and illuminated walls that I had chosen. I lay in bed for a luxurious 10 minutes, doing absolutely nothing, and it felt like the most radical act of my entire life. My kitchen was small but perfectly functional, and making coffee became a meditation rather than a chore. I could take as long as I wanted, use as much cream as I pleased, drink it from whatever cup I chose. Simple freedoms that felt enormous after months of invisible supervision. I carried my coffee to the balcony and watched the Chicago River flow beneath the morning mist, feeling something unlock in my chest that I hadn't even realized had been clenched tight. The silence was different here, too. Not the oppressive quiet of someone trying not to be noticed, but the peaceful calm of someone who belonged exactly where they were. By noon, I had done something I hadn't done in almost a year. I had gotten dressed up and gone shopping, not for necessities or items from someone else's list, but for pure pleasure. I took the bus downtown. Yes, I remembered how to navigate public transportation, and spent 2 hours in Marshall Fields, now Macy's, trying on clothes and buying things simply because I liked them. The saleswoman, a cheerful woman in her 40s named Sandra, treated me like any other customer making personal choices about her appearance. No condescending questions about whether I was sure about my selections. No suggestions that I call someone to confirm my purchases. Just honest fashion advice and genuine enthusiasm for helping me find things that made me feel good. "That color is beautiful on you," Sandra said as I tried on a soft lavender sweater that I never would have chosen while living with Claire. "It brings out your eyes." When was the last time someone had complimented my eyes? When was the last time I had looked in a mirror and seen anything but an aging woman who was becoming a burden? I bought the sweater, along with a pair of well-fitting jeans, comfortable walking shoes, and a silk scarf that felt like a small rebellion against the practical, colorless wardrobe I'd accumulated over the past year. The total came to more than I'd spent on myself in months, and it felt wonderful. "Treating yourself?" Sandra asked as she wrapped my purchases. "Starting to," I replied, and we both smiled. That afternoon, I did something even more transformative. I called my old friend Janet, the coworker I'd lost touch with when Claire changed my phone number. It took some detective work through directory assistance, but I found her. "Evelyn?" Janet's voice was shocked and delighted. "Oh my goodness, I've been trying to reach you for months. I was so worried something had happened to you." "Something did happen," I said, "but I'm better now." We talked for 2 hours, catching up on neighborhood gossip, mutual friends, and the small details of daily life that had seemed so unimportant when I was living under constant scrutiny, but now felt like lifelines connecting me to the world. Janet invited me to lunch the following week, and I accepted without having to check with anyone or justify my plans. "It's so good to hear your voice," Janet said as we were ending the call. "You sound like yourself again, like myself again." I hadn't realized how far I'd drifted from my own identity until I began the journey back. That evening, I cooked dinner for myself. A real dinner. Not just something to fill my stomach. Salmon with lemon and herbs, roasted vegetables, a small glass of wine that I sipped while reading a novel I'd chosen from the community library. The book was a romance. Something I would have been embarrassed to read in Claire's house because it seemed frivolous, inappropriate for someone my age. Now I read it openly, laughing at the funny parts and sighing at the romantic scenes without worrying about anyone's judgment. The second week brought new adventures. I signed up for a watercolor painting class at the community center, something I'd always wanted to try but had never had time for during my working years. The instructor, a patient woman named Marie, treated all of us beginners with the same gentle encouragement, regardless of age or ability level. "There's no wrong way to paint," she told our small group of aspiring artists. "The only mistake is not trying." My first attempts were clumsy, childlike, nothing that would ever hang in a gallery. But they were mine, created by my hands according to my vision, and they filled me with a satisfaction I hadn't felt in years. I was learning something new at 80 years old, proving to myself that my mind was still curious, still capable of growth and change. The other students in the class were a diverse group: a retired teacher, a young mother who came during her children's school hours, a man in his 70s who'd taken up painting after his wife died. We were all beginners together, all vulnerable and eager to learn, and age became irrelevant in the face of shared creativity. "You have a good eye for color," Marie told me after my third class, studying my attempt at painting the sunset over the river. "Have you considered taking the intermediate class?" I had. The fact that someone was encouraging me to advance, to challenge myself further, felt like validation of my decision to reclaim my independence. The third week brought an unexpected visitor. I was reading on my balcony when the intercom buzzed, and the front desk announced that Emma was here to see me. I found her in the lobby, looking slightly overwhelmed by the elegant surroundings but determined to be there. She was carrying a small backpack and wearing the serious expression she got when she was nervous about something important. "Hi, Grandma," she said, and then immediately burst into tears. I held her while she cried. This beautiful, complicated teenager who was navigating her own relationship with parents who meant well, but didn't always understand the impact of their actions. "I'm sorry," she said when the tears subsided. "I'm sorry about how they treated you. I'm sorry I didn't speak up sooner." "Oh, sweetheart, you have nothing to apologize for. You spoke up when it mattered, and that took courage." "Mom's been crying a lot," Emma said quietly. "She feels terrible about everything. She says she was trying to protect you, but she knows now that she was actually hurting you. How are you handling all of this?" Emma shrugged with the studied nonchalance that teenagers use to mask deep emotions. "It's been weird. They've been asking me about money stuff, like how much college costs and whether I'm planning to live at home afterward. I think they're freaking out about not having your money to count on." The honesty was brutal and illuminating. "And how does that make you feel?" "Gross, honestly. Like I knew we weren't poor, but I didn't know they were planning your money into our future. It makes me feel, I don't know, like I don't want any of it if that's how they got it." I studied my granddaughter's face, seeing the moral clarity that had emerged from witnessing her parents' behavior. She was growing up fast, learning hard lessons about the complexities of adult relationships and the ways that money could corrupt even loving families. "Emma, I want you to know that my decisions about my money aren't about punishing your parents or you. They're about making sure that my relationships with all of you are based on love, not financial dependency." "I get it," she said, "and I respect it. Actually, I think it's kind of badass." I laughed at the unexpected compliment. "Badass?" "Yeah. Like you're 80 years old and you just completely took control of your life. You moved out, you're learning new things, you look happier than I've seen you in months. It's inspiring." We spent the afternoon together, and I showed her my apartment, my paintings from class, the view from my balcony that had become my daily meditation spot. Emma helped me hang pictures on the walls and arrange furniture until the space felt truly like home. "Can I come back next weekend?" she asked as she was getting ready to leave. "Every weekend if you want to. We'll make those chocolate chip cookies I promised you. And you'll teach me to paint? If you'd like to learn." As I walked her to the lobby, Emma stopped and looked at me seriously. "Grandma, are you happier now?" I considered the question, thinking about the mornings when I woke up looking forward to the day, the evenings when I fell asleep satisfied with my choices, the gradual return of the woman I'd been before I started questioning my own competence. "Yes," I said simply. "I'm happier than I've been in a very long time." "Good," Emma said fiercely. "You deserve to be happy." That night, I sat on my balcony with a cup of tea and watched the city lights reflect on the water. Somewhere out there, Claire was probably worrying about me, wondering if I was safe, if I was making good decisions, if I would eventually forgive her for the months of benevolent control that had nearly erased me. But I wasn't angry anymore. Anger required too much energy, and I had better things to do with my time. I was too busy rediscovering who Evelyn Thompson was when she wasn't being managed, supervised, or diminished by people who thought they knew what was best for her. I was too busy living to waste time on resentment. For the first time in months, I was excited about tomorrow. Not because anything special was planned, but because it would be my day to shape however I chose. And that possibility, pure, unlimited, magnificent possibility, felt like the greatest gift I'd ever given myself. 6 months later, I stood in the same spot where this story began, in front of a mirror, looking at my reflection. But everything had changed. The woman looking back at me had clear eyes, straight shoulders, and a smile that reached all the way to her heart. She was wearing the lavender sweater that brought out her eyes, and her silver hair was styled in a way that made her feel beautiful, rather than invisible. This was Evelyn Thompson at 80 years old, and she was magnificent. The morning light streaming through my apartment windows had become my daily blessing, a reminder that I had awakened to another day of my own choosing. My coffee ritual had evolved into something sacred, not just the preparation of a beverage, but a moment of gratitude for the simple freedom to start my day according to my own rhythm. I had been living at Riverside Gardens for half a year now, and every day had brought new discoveries about who I was when I wasn't trying to be small, compliant, or convenient for others. The woman who emerged from those months of self-discovery was someone I was proud to know. My watercolor painting had progressed to the point where Marie suggested I consider selling my work at the community's annual art fair. The thought of someone wanting to purchase something I had created with my own hands filled me with a pride I hadn't felt since Claire's high school graduation. "You've found your voice," Marie told me as she examined my latest painting. A sunset over the Chicago River viewed from my balcony, rendered in soft purples and golds that seemed to glow from within. "There's confidence in your brushstrokes now, a certainty that wasn't there when you started." Confidence. Certainty. Words that had been missing from my vocabulary for so long, I'd forgotten they could apply to me. My friendship with Janet had deepened into something precious and sustaining. We met for lunch every Tuesday, went to movies on Friday afternoons, and talked on the phone most evenings like teenagers sharing secrets. She had become my witness, the person who could confirm that I was not losing my mind, not becoming incompetent, not sliding into the confused twilight that Claire had convinced me was my inevitable future. "You're blooming," Janet told me one afternoon as we walked along the lakefront, something I couldn't have imagined doing 6 months ago when I was afraid to leave the house without permission. It's like watching a flower that was kept in the dark finally get sunlight. I had also discovered the joy of solitude. Not the loneliness I'd experienced while living with Claire, but the rich, nourishing quiet of someone who enjoyed her own company. I read voraciously, devouring novels and biographies and books about art history that fed my new passion for painting. I listened to music I'd never had time to explore, from jazz to classical to the folk songs of my youth that brought back memories of a time when anything seemed possible. Most surprisingly, I had made new friends. The community at Riverside Gardens was filled with people who, like me, had chosen independence over dependence, dignity over convenience. We were a collection of individuals who refused to be defined solely by our age, who were determined to keep growing and learning and contributing to the world until our very last breath. There was Margaret, a former librarian who organized our book club and had introduced me to authors I'd never heard of. Robert, a retired jazz musician who played piano in the community room on Sunday afternoons and had convinced me to try singing again, something I hadn't done since Claire was small. And Sarah, a widow who had moved here from the suburbs after her children tried to convince her she needed full-time care, despite her perfect health and sharp mind. We were a family of choice, bound together not by blood or obligation, but by mutual respect and shared values. We celebrated each other's birthdays, attended each other's doctor appointments when moral support was needed, and most importantly, we treated each other as competent adults capable of making our own decisions. Emma had become a regular fixture in my new life, visiting every weekend and bringing an energy and perspective that kept me connected to the younger generation. She had learned to paint with surprising skill, her teenage impatience balanced by a natural artistic eye that reminded me why I'd fallen in love with the medium myself. "Grandma," she said one Saturday afternoon as we painted side by side on my balcony, "I've been thinking about what happened with Mom and Dad." "What about it, sweetheart?" "I think they were scared. I think they saw you getting older and panicked about losing you. So they tried to control everything to make sure nothing bad would happen. But they didn't realize that by trying to keep you safe, they were actually hurting you." The wisdom of 17 years old could be startling. Emma had grown up significantly over the past months, and I suspected that witnessing her parents' treatment of me had forced her to confront some uncomfortable truths about the adults in her life. "I think you're right," I said, Fear can make people do things they wouldn't normally do, things that go against their own values. Have you forgiven them? I considered the question while adding a touch of yellow to the sunset I was painting. I've forgiven them for being human, for being flawed, for making mistakes based on love and fear rather than malice. But I haven't forgotten the lessons I learned about the importance of standing up for myself. Do you think you'll ever go back to living with them? No, I said without hesitation. This is my home now. These are my choices to make. If your parents want a relationship with me, they'll have to accept me as I am, an independent woman who happens to be their mother and grandmother. Emma nodded solemnly. I told them that. I said you weren't being stubborn or mean, you were just being yourself, and that if they loved you, they should be happy that you're happy. And what did they say? Mom cried. Dad got quiet. But I think they're starting to understand. Indeed, over the past month, I had begun receiving tentative overtures from Claire and David, not demands that I come home or lectures about my irresponsibility, but genuine inquiries about my well-being. Claire had sent flowers on my birthday with a card that simply said, "I love you, Mom. I hope you're happy." David had called to tell me about a financial planning seminar he thought I might find interesting, treating me like a competent adult capable of managing my own affairs. The changes were small but significant, suggesting that perhaps they were learning to see me as a person rather than a problem to be solved. But the most profound change was in how I saw myself. The woman I'd become over these months wasn't someone I'd invented from scratch. She was who I'd always been underneath the layers of doubt and accommodation and fear. She was the 23-year-old who had raised a child alone, the woman who had worked multiple jobs and still found energy to help with homework, the person who had turned challenges into opportunities and obstacles into stepping stones. That woman had never really disappeared. She'd just been buried under years of being told she wasn't capable, wasn't young enough, wasn't sharp enough, wasn't valuable enough to make her own decisions. Now she was back, and she was glorious. On a crisp November morning, I received an unexpected phone call from a lawyer representing the estate of my old neighbor, Mrs. Patterson. She had passed away peacefully in her sleep and had left me a small inheritance. Not money, but something far more precious. She left you her garden, the lawyer explained. The community garden behind her building. She said in her will that you were the only person she trusted to keep it beautiful and productive. A garden. Mrs. Patterson had remembered my love of growing things, my pride in the small vegetable patch I'd maintained behind my old house. She had given me roots, literally and figuratively, in the community where I'd lived for so many years. That afternoon, I took the bus to my old neighborhood and walked through the garden Mrs. Patterson had tended for decades. It was dormant now, waiting for spring, but I could see the bones of something beautiful, raised beds for vegetables, a corner dedicated to flowers, a small greenhouse where seedlings could get their start. I could envision myself here come spring, my hands in the soil, nurturing new growth and feeding neighbors who might not have access to fresh vegetables. I could see Emma helping me plant seeds, learning the patience and faith required to tend growing things. This was my legacy. Not just the money I'd accumulated, but the life I'd chosen to live. The example I'd set for my granddaughter about the importance of self-respect and independence. The proof that it's never too late to reclaim your power, to choose dignity over convenience, to insist on being treated as a whole person rather than a collection of problems to be managed. As I stood in that garden, surrounded by the dormant promise of spring, I understood that my story wasn't about an old woman who'd been mistreated by her family. It was about a human being who'd remembered her worth and refused to accept anything less than the respect she deserved. It was about the difference between existing and living, between being managed and being free. The evening light was fading as I made my way back to my apartment, but I felt illuminated from within. Tomorrow would bring new possibilities, new choices, new opportunities to be authentically myself, and I would meet them with the confidence of someone who had learned, at age 80, that it's never too late to bloom. I thought about all the people listening to my story, people who might be facing their own challenges with aging, with family dynamics, with the question of how to maintain dignity and independence in a world that often sees elderly people as problems to be solved rather than individuals to be respected. Have you ever felt invisible in your own life? Have you ever been treated like your years of experience and wisdom suddenly meant nothing because you'd reached a certain age? Have you ever had to choose between keeping the peace and standing up for yourself? If any of this sounds familiar, I want you to know that you are not alone and you are not powerless. You have the right to be treated with dignity, to make your own choices, and to live authentically no matter what your age. Drop a comment below and share your story. Let's support each other in claiming the respect we deserve. And if this story spoke to you, please like this video and subscribe to the channel. Let's make sure this message reaches everyone who needs to hear it. Remember, you are never too old to reclaim your power, and you are never too old to bloom.